Welcome to the Digital Agency Growth Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Englander.
Leah, great to have you on the show.
Great to be here. Super excited for it.
Yeah, likewise. And I always like having ops people on the show because I think it's kind of like the unsung hero. Ops often doesn't get the credit it deserves. And I think it's because it's hard, and it's messy and it's sort of amorphous. It can mean a lot of different things. So we'll obviously get into that and everything you're doing to help agencies there. Before we do that, would you mind kind of giving us a little on your background and kind of how you got to founding Alderaan?
Yeah, sure thing. So my background actually is in technical journalism. And the reason I like to share that often is because it really shares the structure, of how I think and how I approach operations. Because in journalism, you're taught you have a beginning, middle, and end to everything, right? And it's very simple for any person to capture that and understand that very quickly. And so that's informed my working style and ultimately how I grew Alderaan, from going from technical journalism to content marketing to working with digital marketing agencies and specifically with local SEO, and then expanding to paid media, and going from being boots on the ground and being hands-on and then naturally organizing things to having the beginning, middle, and end, of the process. And that led me to project management and then account management. And then ultimately, like you said, kind of a little amorphous with operations, doing a little bit of everything and just being naturally inclined to wanting to organize things and having that simple framework, that 3-step system of having a beginning, middle, and end, whether it was new client onboarding, where are they starting with us? What's that handoff from sales to operations? What does the project look like with the launch? And then what does that ongoing retainer or account management look like? Beginning, middle, and end. And that kept growing and growing to the point where I had a great opportunity with the digital marketing agency to become their COO full-time, at that point. And that really opened up my eyes to the beauty of the chaos of digital marketing agencies and specifically being in that high-level ops seat. So how it ultimately came to be where I'm at today, which is with Alderaan Business Solutions, we provide outsourced operations professionals for small remote digital marketing agencies. And we primarily focus on outsourced ops managers, but we have fractional ops directors as well as fractional COOs, and how it kind of all culminated from being full-time to going back to contract work and being fractional was really seeing how many agency owners are struggling with ops, struggling with like, what the heck is ops to begin with, let alone how do I do this, and then who is responsible for it all. And I've seen the pain of agency owners time and again, trying to figure it out on their own. And being a business owner myself, I know a bit of that loneliness of being at the top by yourself and doing it by yourself. And so I'm really keyed into having that right-hand person, that right-hand ops person that can change your perspective, change your work-life balance, and empower your team to be part of something so much bigger than what they had originally signed up for. So that's a bit of like how I came to be the owner of Alderaan at this point.
Yeah, thank you for that intro. There's a couple of things that jump out at me. For one, I think that there's this kind of through line of coming from an unconventional background and then having success in the agency space. With technical journalism, there's been sort of a trend of successful agency founders that were former musicians. And it kind of makes sense, I guess, in hindsight, because it's an entrepreneurial type artist role, and you have to go out, you have to sort of pitch, and you have to be in front of people, and it kind of makes sense. And that's interesting, you coming from a tech journalism background. So one question that comes to mind, and I had my buddy Dan Andrews on the show a while back, who runs Dynamite Circle, but he has an e-commerce background. But now he's working with a lot of entrepreneurs, many of whom are agency owners. And he sort of compared running an agency to being like the track and field of entrepreneurship or business ownership, where he's like, you got to be good at so many things. It's way harder than just having like making widgets or something. So first of all, like, do you think that that's true? And if so, what is it that makes running an agency uniquely difficult from like an operational perspective?
Wonderful question, because I would agree with that you do have to be skilled at many different things in order to run an agency. And part of it is that you need to have the passion and the energy for what you're here to do. And if you're the agency owner, it is to lead, it is to inspire, right? And I do feel that in an agency setting, there's always the asterisk next to your role, right? So you're not just the agency owner, you're not just the visionary. You may also sit, especially for small, remote agencies where you're still building it. You still need to be sitting in a lot of different seats, wearing a lot of different hats, that you always have the yes and. Yes, I'm the visionary and I'm also the sales and marketing director. Or yes, I'm sitting in the sales seat and I'm still also handling the chief strategy component. So from an owner's perspective, absolutely, you need to be skilled at a lot of different things. And where the operations component comes into it is where actually they're probably the least skilled, right? Is where they really need to find that yin to their yang. They need to find that integrator to their visionary component. So I talk a lot in US based terms, entrepreneurial operating system. I've been self-implementing since 2016. And I really believe in the system, but I believe in the principles of it, not pure EOS, but principles of it for small agencies, because they can benefit so greatly from just having that little dose of structure. And that's the difference that operations makes in agencies, is that they come at it with, yes, we have to be nimble. Yes, we have to be flexible. Yes, we have to be creative, because we are constantly balancing the yin and the yang of being an agency, the creativity and the strategic brainstorming side, but then also the implementation and execution. We do it all. So you have to, from an operations perspective, be very conscious and compassionate with that, because you're dealing with a lot of creatives, but then you're also dealing potentially with a lot of technical individuals, and you're having a lot of different personalities, different systems, processes, and you're that little drop of order in the system of chaos. And I think that is a different from, other types of industries and other businesses, because in agency life, it's a blessing that we have that. It's not a curse. I think a lot of people can definitely fall into that trap in agency life, that is burnout. I totally understand that. I've been a victim of it myself. And if we are open to changing our perspectives, especially by embracing that operations component of agency life, that is where we can look at it. We have all the opportunity in the world to do what we're best at, rather than, oh my gosh, I'm a slave to this business and it's just crushing me.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that there's a lot of jumping off points from there. One thing that you touched on is EOS, and there's these sort of business religions. There's EOS, there's scaling up. There's probably another one or two that I'm thinking of. To talk about our experience a little bit, we tried to implement EOS, and we still do to some extent. I think earlier we were too small for it. And then more recently, I've sort of been like, and this is also inspired by other colleagues or other entrepreneurs that I know, we've sort of taken some parts and left the rest, just because we felt like a lot of it was creating lots of busy work and just adding more noise to just being like, okay, here's the things we want to do this quarter. Here's what everyone's doing, as opposed to having like a really formal org chart and having all this sort of stuff. So with that, how do these business religions influence or affect the service you're giving clients? How do you think about them? How does it apply at different stages of the agency?
It's a great point to bring up, because I agree that EOS can be almost smothering for especially smaller agencies. And when I talk about like small, I'm talking about 3 to 30 people that are just under or just over the $1 million annual revenue mark. And that's small to me, where EOS, it's a very robust system, and it is ideal for the target audience that they've picked, which is typically over 50 people. It's over 2 million annual revenue. And even then, I think you could kind of nudge those numbers up as well, because for small agencies, how I adapt EOS is, again, coming back to the principles, the core fundamentals of good business practice. That's what it comes down to, is having, for example, some of those key items like an accountability chart. It's so much more powerful than just an organizational chart. And that kind of difference that you can bring in from a system like EOS, of having not just, oh, here's the hierarchy, of who reports to whom, but here is what everyone is responsible for. And it is that guiding light of when you are sitting in like 5 different seats in the agency, that you can go back to it and go, okay, when I've got this hat on, I'm responsible for this number. I've got these 3 responsibilities. And when I'm asking someone else to sit in one of the other seats, this is what I'm expecting of them. So there's so much detail that's packed into some of these fundamentals, like the accountability chart, like a scorecard, a company scorecard, where you've just got your finger on the pulse of some high level numbers, that I think it actually helps agencies simplify that chaos that they're dealing with. And EOS, and Agile, I think I take a little bit of both principles, for smaller agencies, so that they can be nimble and embrace just that touch of structure that is going to help sustain them. That's the biggest thing that I'm focused on, for all of my clients, no matter what they do with us or how long they're with us for, is that we're looking to build that foundation for them to make it sustainable, that no matter how much they grow, how much they change, how many service lines they add or delete, how many team members they bring on, or whenever they have to contract, it's that core foundation is sustainable. It's solid, so that they're not having to recreate the wheel. They're not having to ask, like, who are we? Who do we service? They've got all of that information at the tip of their hands. And that means then that their team members are also that much more bought in. Right. And that's, I think, the power of some of those systems like EOS, is that it just tells you the basics: who, what, where, when, why, and how. Very, very simply, that like anybody that jumps into the deep end with you, they're now running next to you. They're not like you having to pull them, along with you.
Yeah, that makes sense. And sometimes just having like any sort of structure is better than having nothing. So that's great. And to kind of move this to what you're actually doing, can you talk about that a little bit? Like, you talk about the foundations of the process. Like, what does that usually look like for the agencies you're taking on? Like, what does the typical onboarding process look like for you guys?
So we have a system we call the Alderaan approach, which is where we focus on the goals and then systems and then team, of the agency. And so when we're first onboarding a new account with us, we're identifying first who's the best fit with them. So if they're really needing somebody like boots on the ground, day in, day out, operations management, that's when they have an outsourced ops manager. If they're really needing more of that strategic planning, strategic decision making, they have enough people like working in the business, but they don't have anyone else working on the business. That's where we can decide if a fractional COO is the best fit for them. And then we also have engagements where we're just doing the basics for them of like building out their SOPs. And for every single level that we work with them at, again, we're kind of going through that system of like, what are your goals here in the beginning? Like, what are you expecting out of this? Like, what does success look like to you? And then we actually help them build the systems. So whether it is actually writing out and documenting those processes, or we're building out, say, their project management platform, and we're creating all the tasks and subtasks and descriptions for them, training their team, you name it, all the way to engaging, with their team and mentoring and coaching them. So we really embed into the organizations that we work with. We are not, we try and make this super clear. Like, we are not a contractor, a consultant, a hands-off strategic planner. We are embedded into your business, and we become a team member of yours. And I was laughing about this with one of my team members earlier. Actually, I was recalling like how many agency websites I'm actually on, and I'm in like their branded gear, and I'm on their website and their about page, as their COO, for example, because they see us as their team member. They see us as, part of their organization. It doesn't feel fractional or outsourced or contract. So we really, really dive into the deep end and get our hands dirty with every agency we work with, because this is going to sound a little cheesy, but we love them and we want to legitimately help them and make their lives easier. And that's what it all comes down to. And so typically we're working with some agencies from 18 months, to 2.5 years, and really helping them grow. One of our core values, actually, this is one of EOS's core values as well, is grow or die. And we firmly believe in that in the agency space, is that there's always room to improve, to have that 1% being better every day. And whether it's literally growing like the size of the company, or growing our skills and capabilities, or growing our teams, we want to encourage them to evolve and mature as agencies. And that's where the hands-on work, really is a key part of that.
Right. Makes sense. My guess is one objection you might get with agencies you're talking to is, hey, can this actually be handled in a fractional way? This is such a key part of the business. You have to get your hands so dirty. You have to have so much knowledge, be involved in so long to actually suggest like a good operational improvement. So how do you typically handle that objection?
So there are two parts to handling that objection. One is that we've worked with so many agencies at this point, like we know the habits, we know the traditional structures that will help any agency improve. Now, we also know that in order to make it the right fit, like we do need to be embedded into that company, so that like we're not out there, again, being kind of like that consultant of like, oh, here's a general plan that you can follow. It is, oh no, we need to apply that general plan, work on it together, and enhance it, improve it, adjust it, tweak it, and then make it personalized to that agency. And so that's kind of the first part is we really need to be hands-on, to make sure that the experience can then speak for itself from what we've learned to what we can apply. The second part of that is that it doesn't really matter, in my opinion, on the number of hours. And I would say if you talk to any of my team members, it's the same, that when you look at what the output is versus the number of hours, like if we start getting, of course, like the agency owner's mindset out of hourly, like time and materials, and into value-based pricing. Like this is a great example of that, is that especially when you're looking at like ops management or project management or account management, an hour of this person's time to an hour of that person's time is just not equal. And it can't always be applied in that way. It needs to be looked at as what is the long-term benefit of the change that we're making. So if we have this operations manager that comes in and they write an SOP, okay, we're not looking at that deliverable of we've got one SOP, check. We're looking at how many hours are we now saving for the rest of the team because this is more efficient? Or how much time are we saving from onboarding new team members? And so instead of it being 3 months, now we're getting it down to 3 weeks so that we can get them up and running. And the operational efficiencies that can be employed really quickly, whether we're there for 10 hours a week or 40 hours a week. I mean, it's so mind-blowing, the changes that we can make in a fraction of the time, that it's going to be so life-changing for them. It doesn't matter again if it's 40 hours a week, or 10 hours a week, because the same thing could also be said of, why are you only working 40 hours a week? If you know that that you could be doing even more, why aren't you doing 60, 80 hours a week? Right. And so to us, it's kind of the same argument that we can be efficient and incredibly effective in a fraction of the time. That why not start there if that's the right fit for you right now?
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that goes all the way down the line, right? Because most agencies know at this point that hourly models aren't good for them and how they charge. So why shouldn't it be the same way for the people they hire? With that in mind, though, like what does that cadence look like? Like if you want to hire a fractional ops person, like how often are you meeting with clients? How are you getting the right information? What is tangibly kind of how does that play out?
Like how is that fractional ops person embedded into the company?
Yeah, how are they embedded? Like, what's the cadence of communication? And even if it's not fractional, even if there's an agency that's just kind of wearing multiple hats and doing this on their own, how should they think about the cadence of the meetings and the sort of work they're doing on a weekly or monthly basis?
Well, daily is kind of my first, thought that comes to mind is like daily, you should be touching base or having updates in some format or another. And I don't mean meetings. A lot of people interpret that of like, oh, we need to be in meetings all the time with the operations, and because you can only talk these things through, and that's just not accurate. Like we, for example, in our initial engagement, we start with 30, 60, 90-day plans. And the first 30 days, we really emphasize that you should have daily communications of some sort. So whether it's a quick Slack update, you have your Monday plans and your Friday reports, like you're over communicating to the team. And this is primarily with the agency owner. You're communicating with them to let them know that you're working, that you're online, that you're available, because we work exclusively remotely. There's actually 99%. There's like 1% that will be in person for like annual planning sessions or company retreats. But most of the time it's all remote. And so a big part of building that trust in your operations professional is actually encouraging them to over communicate with you first. And just setting that consistency in tone of, hey, I got this. Hey, I'm here. Hey, I'm working hard for you. And if you have that for the first 30 days, almost inevitably you have the agency owners turning around by day 30 and saying, okay, great, I got it. You're here. You're solid. And then it can kind of trickle down into, at the lowest, you're having weekly check-ins. If you're not starting with dailies, then you have at least weekly, because there's so much that changes on a day-to-day basis in agencies, that when I hear like other fractionals working in other industries, like other fractional C-level executives that only meet with their clients maybe once a week for like a half day, my mind is blown, because I'm like, there's so much that could have changed in that week, so much that's happened. So typically there is still like that day-to-day cadence that you have, but you may only have like a weekly meeting then. And this is where you'll hear a little bit more of the EOS, structure coming in, because then we have like our weekly leadership 10 meeting, L10 meetings. And that's where you've got the ops professional in with the owner. And again, those are typically for smaller companies that don't have other leadership team members. They don't have enough of that structure. So we start building that in. Otherwise, if they do have other leadership team members, we start embedding into that as well. So you've got your daily at the beginning, you've got at least weekly ongoing. Then you've got your monthly management meetings. These are like the bigger picture, like, okay, we've got bigger issues that need to go outside of the 90 minutes every week. We need to actually go deeper on them. And then you have your quarterly planning, you have your annual planning, et cetera. And so that's kind of like the meeting structure, the communication structure. But otherwise, we're in there day in, day out. So even if it's spread out a little bit every day, like it's 2 or 3 hours every single day, or it fluctuates. Some of my team members, have heavier schedules like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, because that's where you have like more company meetings, you have more department meetings as you get bigger, you just have more people to manage. Again, there is a lot of emphasis on typically the meetings on the ops side, but we also are heavily leaning toward async communication and encouraging every agency to embrace it. There are so many agencies out there that I've seen that went hybrid and then ultimately went remote from the pandemic. And they are still acting as if they are in office, right? They are still acting as if they are hybrid, and they haven't fully embraced the remote culture, 100%. And the big piece of that is the asynchronous communication, using Loom videos, using more written communication, honestly, using emojis and having more of those collaborative moments that aren't reliant on you literally sitting on a Zoom call or literally sitting on a Slack huddle unless it's totally necessary. If it can't be done in 5 or 10 minutes through written communication, great. Jump on a quick huddle, 5-10 minutes, talk it out. But otherwise, keep it to written format or video format. And so from an operations, kind of looping this back around from an operations perspective, this can all sound like a lot. And particularly for those that are not in the operations seat, whether it's ops manager or fractional COO or whatever, it can sound like, holy moly, even if that's not required of me, that's a lot of communication to or from the ops manager. And ultimately, it sounds like a lot in theory, but in practice, it tightens those bonds within the team every single time, because that person that sits in the ops seat, even if they sometimes don't have that title, like I know that there are also some project managers out there that are probably nodding their head and going like, oh yeah, I do all this stuff. And they're probably a little bit more on the ops seat and ops responsibilities than just project management. But even for them, it's really emphasizing the support, right? The support that we are all in it together, that we are a team. No matter if you're full-time, part-time, fractional, contractor, employee, like doesn't matter. We're in this together. And if we have that support with one another, we can continue that growth trajectory. So I might have gone a little bit off on the tangent there, but I get really excited about it because being in it, we're just like anyone else, in the company. We act as them.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. And I think tied to that, to shift gears a little bit, let's talk about SOPs a little bit. It's funny because we're in our space, the parallel space in the sales world, the thing that always gets sold are leads, right? Get more leads and solve all your problems. That's what's big in our space. In the ops world, I feel like SOPs are sometimes like that because it's the thing that's like easy to do. You can sell them. You could have a productized process for creating them. So you hear about SOPs a whole lot. But I think the challenge that we've had internally and that we see a lot of our clients have is they can be really brittle. They're made of glass. So you have one small little bit of chaos, like, hey, we're going to switch up our ICP a little, we're going to switch up the service, or we're going to switch up the org chart, and then all the SOPs crumble. They come a tumbling down, right? So my question is, how do you decide and when do you decide what you SOP and how do you avoid that issue?
That's a really great question. I love talking about SOPs because our SOPs and how we structure them aim to avoid that brittleness. We try and be fairly robust. And I don't mean a robust in the sense of like, oh, we just have more detail and more screenshots. We have it structured out where it's, and I'm thinking a little bit more on the technical journalism side. Again, you go from like big to little, top to bottom. And so you have your overview first. Like, what the heck is this process? Then you have, why is it important, right? So why are we asking anyone to do this? And like, what is the benefit to you and or to the company? And then we go into anything that is related to you getting this done. So what are the resources or what are the quick links that you may need to know? Like, is this on a specific platform that you wouldn't know until you actually have done it before? And then we go into the process and then the procedure. And there's a key difference there. And this actually came from Cameron Harold ages ago. I just love his content, but he had always structured it as the post-it note process, that a process is only a process if you can fit it on a post-it note. It's like the top 3 to 5 steps of a process. So when we think of the process, this 3-step process, right, of like beginning, middle, and end, right? Same thing. It's like you can put that on a post-it note versus a procedure is the literal how-to. And that's where it can definitely get more brittle because I see this every time, especially with paid media agencies and like just taking screenshots for like Facebook, for example, and saying, okay, go here and do this. How many times has Facebook changed their interface, right? Where all of those screenshots mean nothing all of a sudden, right? And so then it's about going back up to the process and the beginning, middle, end that anybody can understand. So no matter what changes in the procedure, no matter who actually changes and the responsibilities of maybe this gets handed off from a specialist to a strategist, or a strategist to a manager, that anybody can read that first page, of one of our SOPs and understand who is benefiting from this. What are we asking of them? Where the heck is this located? When is it supposed to be done? And then at the end, you get into like the how and the literal how. And the literal how you can change, you can adjust, you can tweak, you can improve upon over time, like you said, especially when they are a little bit brittle and something changes that's outside of your control. But the best SOP, and SOP it's just the easiest, slang that you can use, right? And so the best SOP though is so much more than that. It's an overview document. It's the process understanding. It's the role and responsibility guidelines, right? Who is responsible for this and who's responsible also for QAing it, right? Not just like, oh, okay, I did this once and we can move on. So I feel like when we talk about SOPs, that's the key difference. And that's probably where, like you said, from the sales side, it's all about getting leads. From ops side, all about getting SOPs. But the devil's in the details, right? What does that really mean? And I think of this all the time with like all the LinkedIn messages. I'm sure you get them as well. If I can promise you like 100 leads a day, and I'm just like, yeah, I don't need 100 or want 100 leads a day. And it's going to be way too much work to sift through them. But if somebody comes to me and says, I can refer you one quality agency a month, like, whoa, first of all, what quality looks like to me. You also know who my target audience is, and you know what our cadence could be. I want to talk with that person. So that's, I think, the difference with our SOPs as well is the robustness of them can stand up through time.
Yeah, I really like that. I think that's a great response to the objection, and the brevity in general, really goes a long way to making something robust or even anti-fragile to get into the seam teleb land. One place my head goes in reference to operations is from a completely different domain. And this is why I think it's really cool, like sometimes to get inspiration from just like out there areas. And this is a book people might know. It's called Fair Play. Have you heard of it by chance?
I've heard of it, but I have not read it.
It's for couples, it's for families, and it's basically about it's basically operations for the household, right? And it was written by a professional lady named Eve Rodsky. And she was kind of fell into a role that I think a lot of women fall into, where they're both handling their professional lives and also by default managing the home, and that becomes unsustainable. And the idea is you divide up cards that kind of cover common household duties, and then the owner, whether it's husband, wife, whoever in the family, has full ownership over conceiving, planning, and executing, right? So CPE. And as well, and then there's another dimension of it, which is what she got from a legal background from being a lawyer formerly, called minimum standard of care, which MSC, which is negotiable on a cultural basis. Like, what is if you take out the trash, are you doing dishes? What's the minimum standard of care? And between families and between cultures, that can vary a lot. And immediately I'm just like, wow, this is perfect from an operational perspective. This is like a really great way to think of it, whether it's a business or a household. So I don't know if I have a good question. Do you have any thoughts on that? How applicable do you see parallels in a business sense?
Oh, 100%. And I love that because it reminded me of a good friend and another fractional COO, Nicole Meineke, who she had developed this like 0 to care scale, because we often talk about how do we prioritize? Because obviously there's so many fires, there's so many areas that we could focus on. What really comes up in, of course, like the Eisenhower matrix of urgent and important, but then what's urgent to you, what's important to me. And so in speaking specifically to agency owners, and how to model it for them, it was like, okay, if you're talking like CEO to COO, and the CEO is like, we really need to get this, new service line up and running. Like, we should have had it up yesterday. And from an operations standpoint, your head's about to explode of like, oh my gosh, there's so much more involved in just turning the switch on. Right. And so she brought it up to me, ages ago, using the zero to care model of saying, okay, I'm hearing you that this is really urgent and important. And on my perspective, it's literally the opposite. So in order to come to a consensus, come to, some measure of, we can agree, on what to do next, because ultimately like the COO, the ops person is often like the decision maker, right? But they have to take into account the emotion. Of course, we're dealing with people, right? You have to take into account the emotion, the input, the relationships that you're building, and the camaraderie that you have. And so you say, okay, I hear you. And what is your number on zero to care, right? Like, irregardless of everything else, how much does this like really connect with your soul of, we have to do this. I care so much. It's so important to me and who I am and what the brand of the agency is and how we're how our reputation is viewed. I care so much. Okay, great. Then we're going to have to unprioritize some of these other items, and it may hurt a little bit, but we'll put that up there and we'll figure it out together versus oh, actually, yeah, I really want it. It sounds cool. It sounds fun, or it's really trendy. And if I'm really honest, it's probably on 4 of the scale, 0 to care. And so like quote unquote 0 to 10. And it just gives that language, that shared language that you can use. And that's what I'm hearing as well from like Eve Rodsky's book, Fair Play, is having that shared language. This is what you own. And this is what I own. And what that means is, and this is very similar to like the accountability chart and why it's so much more powerful than just an organizational chart, because it shows you, this is what I own. This is what I'm empowered to do. This is what I'm responsible for. This is what you're going to hold me accountable for. And I get my own little domain to play in. So it sounds very similar to the concept, that you shared from Fair Play as well. And I think jumping around a little bit, but it also reminds me of, if you've ever heard of Jim Quick, KWIK.
Mm-hmm.
I just adore his work with Limitless. And he's always got those kind of catchy phrases, but one of them is leaders are readers. And I think that shines, that shares, through when you can connect these very different concepts, but still be using them in practice within an agency. That's when it really cements, because yes, we can talk about EOS, very specific to business practice. Yes, we could talk about very specific agency practices. I mean, there's so many amazing agency coaches and trainings out there to really level you up, and could definitely think of like half dozen off the top of my head that I would recommend. And being able to have that perspective outside of just the agency life, because part of it is also making sure that you have a life outside of the agency, making sure it is, slightly balanced. So yeah, I definitely agree that those concepts, especially when you bring them into your agency culture, like we've seen this with the book Multipliers, it really finding what the titles are for certain types of multipliers or certain types of leaders. Having that shared language, you can then spot it and say, oh yeah, you are a pace setter, and that means X. And then all of a sudden, you can have a much more constructive conversation that doesn't feel as sometimes vulnerable. Like, oh, I can't figure out the words, or I can't find what I'm looking for here.
Right. And with that in mind, my guess is that you're always probably looking for operational talent on a pretty high level so that they can be a fractional COO for agencies that are doing complex things. Can you talk about your hiring process a little bit? Like what are you usually looking for? What questions are you asking when you have somebody that's a multiplier, or however you want to put it?
I've never had that question before, so thank you for asking. So when I'm looking for operations professionals, I definitely have my ranges, what I'm looking for, because we have operations associates, operations managers, director of operations, fractional COOs. And the fractional COOs, I'm much harder on. I'll be totally frank for anyone who's listening, because I'm looking for someone with a very narrow slice subsection, of all of these different backgrounds. That to be a fractional COO, of a digital marketing agency, especially remotely, you need to have worked at a digital marketing agency remotely before. In my eyes, I firmly believe that you need to have that understanding of digital marketing and advertising best practices. You need to understand the structure, and the dynamics between certain departments, between organic versus paid. Some of those sound so simple, but it's so key, because there are so many amazing fractional COOs out there that could definitely come in with a high level view and be very supportive, from a strategic planning perspective. And for the size and structure of agencies that we like to work with, you have to be more hands-on, and you have to be more in depth with the agency and have, that stronger background. So with fractional COOs, it's a much lengthier process. And typically I'm finding them when they're like operations consultants, and they're looking to make more of a switch to being a fractional COO. And then similarly for like ops managers or ops directors, it's typically those individuals that have remote experience with digital marketing ad agencies, where they're at that level of, I know I want to go out on my own, but I actually don't want to be a consultant, or I don't want to be a contractor. They still want a little bit of that stability, of that security, of working with a team or working with others, and not being just an independent by themselves type of individual. And so they're off, and like I mentioned a little bit earlier, a lot of them come from more of those project management backgrounds, where they've already had a taste of what it looks like to do a little bit of everything, because they worked in a small enough agency before that they end up doing a little bit of everything. And now they want to formalize it, and they want to have that experience. And so we offer that to them often. And a lot of those individuals, I'll be honest, and most of my leads and my clients come through this same process as referrals. We're very referral based at this time. And a lot of the individuals that I find specifically for the outsourced ops professionals are through some of the most amazing agency platforms, that I have access to. Like one is Bureau of Digital. I absolutely adore them for the community that they build and continue to nurture. And I often find individuals there, that are very open, to having a conversation, that are already, again, kind of testing the waters of what does it look like to be on their own. There's also the ops community from Jonna Lee and Cameron Harold, and they cater more to like operations professionals, industry agnostic, but there are definitely individuals, in those types of communities that they know they want to be an ops professional, and they just don't know quite maybe where. And so that's where I can find some individuals. And typically the process is, first and foremost, like, I just want to get to know them. So we have an open, honest conversation, less of an interview and more just a dialogue, to get to know each other and really get a sense of their personality. And then we go through a more formal process of, we have an application, we go through an assessment. We then have them do 2 internal interviews, one with myself and then one with my business manager. And then we actually start the process of identifying more of their strengths and skill sets and where we can match them with the right type of client. So we use a couple of assessments. We use DISC and Colby to help with those. And then we also, I'll be totally honest as well, that we're pretty flexible, and we like to make sure that the ops professional wants to be with the agency that we're going to match them with. So we give them that opportunity. We offer it to them. We don't just assign it and say, okay, here's your next assignment, just jump into the deep end. We talk it through with them. We give them all the background. We give them even like the discovery calls, the decision calls. We give them all the information so they can make an educated decision. And then they get to meet the agency owner first. And then again, we go through that process of making sure that they are good personality fit, because once we have that kickoff, they are jumping into the deep end, like right away. So we want to make sure that this is a long lasting engagement, that this fits, that this clicks, and that they get to really, again, enjoy the work that they do just as much as we're trying to teach the agency owner and their teams how to enjoy their work as well.
Yeah, that's great. And that's a really interesting model. And my guess is agencies could probably do a version of that with their clients and letting their team pick, if that's at all possible, because that would be disruptive in a good way. So getting towards the end of our time, Leah, I know that there's a way that you're typically getting started with clients on the SOP front, which you turned me on. I think that the way you're doing it sounds interesting. Can you talk about that a little bit and just where people can go to get more info on what you're up to?
Absolutely. So they can go, straight to our website, alderaanenterprise.com, to learn more specifically, about all of our outsourced, ops professionals. But then to this point, the SOP projects that we typically run for about 2 months, we find that that's kind of the sweet spot where, and we have many agencies that work with us much longer than the 2 months on an SOP project. But that's kind of the entry level. We know that SOPs can be mind numbing for some people and can feel like homework, to others. And so we really want to impress upon them the benefits of it. And so a quick 2 month sprint, we can download a ton of information from them. We typically run through kickoff with them to make sure we have set expectations of what are they looking to get out of this? What are the biggest pain points? What are the biggest fires? Like typically of what the agency owner is still doing in delivery, or fulfillment that we need to help get them out of. And we have them just run through, a very quick Loom video of several of the items that they need to hand off. We develop the SOPs, off of that, have them review and approve them, of course. And we go through a value effort matrix, to determine how many SOPs can we actually get done in these 2 months. Because if they're quick ones that we already have templates and processes that we can pull from, we pull from them. We want to democratize agency operations, give away all the processes and templates. We firmly believe in the benefits of them. So if we already have something started, we use it. And we then customize and personalize it on top of that. But otherwise, if it's like a super unique way of doing things that only this agency does, that's when we're like, okay, it might take a few more hours. Then maybe in a month, we get done with 15 more complex ones. But then over the 2 months, we have also 20 more simple ones. So we kind of work with each agency to determine what that number looks like. And again, what is going to be the most helpful and most practical? This is not like, oh, we're just getting the information out of your head and onto paper to sit there and just be a nice dusty manual on the shelf. Like that is not the intention at all. It has to be who is going to take this off of your plate, right? So if we're making an SOP, they are implementing it with someone else, almost immediately. And then over time, we can refine it, really enjoy having more time on SOPs to build out their entire system and structure of SOPs. But at the very beginning, we just get kind of like that little drop in the bucket of like, okay, here's your introduction to SOPs done the right way, the fun way. So it's a couple months, together, and we have an amazing account manager who holds your hand the entire way through, and the most brilliant SOP documenter, we've ever had. I just adore her. And so they work together and they just knock these out for you as quick as possible. And then they help guide you on how to implement them and plug them into your actual agency.
Awesome. Yeah, it sounds definitely in depth, and we'll get all that linked up. Yeah, thank you so much, and hopefully we'll do this again.
Yeah, thank you. I really enjoyed it.